I am a big fan of storytellers. After all, the corporate motto for my company, Hobson Media Enterprises, is "We tell your story." So anytime I have the chance to communicate with a professional communicator, it's kind of like shop talk. And today we've got some added inspiration to the equation for all of you as we say hello to Tyler Foley, who is checking in with us from a sweltering Canada, which I don't think I've ever used that phrase before, Tyler. So I'm glad you're in an air-conditioned studio. How are you?
I'm doing really well, Bill, but for the heat. And yeah, it is very odd for me to be one of the warmest places on the planet, especially north of the border.
Yeah, absolutely crazy. These are crazy times for everybody. Your story, your personal story that leads into your professional story really leaps right off the page at me. Over the course of the 4.5-ish years that we've had the Big Impact program, we've really dug deeply into some of the backgrounds of our featured guests because I think that what happens when you're younger really plays a key role in helping form what you become when you're older. There are variations to that, but that's generally a pattern. So, how did the story of young Tyler Foley shape the story of, I'm not going to call you old, I'm old, but the current version of Tyler Foley?
Yes, the 42-year evolution of my life. The Really, the story starts young, 6 years old. My father passed away very suddenly of a motor vehicle accident. And out of the ashes of that tragedy grew an interesting career in that, as part of an emotional outlet and something for me to do, my mother ended up putting me in theater. It was a thing that I had taken a shine to very early in the first grade. Um, and I'd performed in a school pageant and just kind of had taken to the stage early on in that school year. And then when my father passed away in February, so three-quarters of the way through, my mom decided that she would just keep that going and really foster that love of the stage. And so I was able to get in and be part of the theater for years and years and years and years. Went into a fine arts high school and was ticking along very nicely with the trajectory of, I'm going to go to Hollywood, be a star, or go to New York and be on Broadway. And then I had a medical incident at 17 that completely and totally derailed that. January 1st, 1997, I woke up and the left side of my body didn't work. And when you're an actor, you're kind of dependent on your body functioning. And my whole left side of my face drooped. I had no feeling in my arms or my legs. I could move them, like I could preambulate in a way, but it was this weird kind of shuffle thing where I couldn't actually make my body work. If I held it to where it needed to be, the muscles were still working, but I had no feeling to control those muscles.
Wow.
And in my face, I just couldn't do anything.
So this was a full-on stroke at the age of 17?
Well, so I we don't know what it was. It was stroke-like.
Mhm.
So it could have been a palsy. It could have been a stroke. Could have been a mini stroke. The problem with narrowing it down to actually calling it a stroke is I've got a really cool MRI that I still keep. It's a really cool image of my brain, but they couldn't find any evidence that would suggest, like, the typical markers of a stroke they can typically find, and I didn't have those. But I also didn't have the typical markers of anything else, and I was young. And so the prevailing theory is, because I'd fallen asleep New Year's Eve in a very awkward position, I probably and very likely pinched both a nerve and the main artery, well, vein, more specifically, the return vein. So the artery was pumping on the one side, but the vein was pinched on the other, along with the nerve. And so my body didn't know to rotate or turn away, and it just built up pressure in my brain. And when I woke up, the left side of my body didn't work.
That is what I
Um,
call a bad night's sleep, if
yeah,
that's indeed what it was. And I know that when you're young and you've been through the first level of trauma, which is obviously devastating when dad passes away,
mhm.
you're probably a little more sensitive to another speed bump coming up. along the way. So that happens. How long do those conditions last in your life?
So that was about a year.
Oh,
I was lucky. I had a really, really good medical team that kind of rallied to my side. And again, blessings and grace in life events. When my father passed away, the community really rallied around my mother and my family, and a lot of the professionals in town, accountants, lawyers, doctors, all really reached out to me and mentored me. So I didn't get raised by one father. I was blessed to have 7, 8, 10 different very positive male role models in my life. And, from Dr. Spackman to Dr. Corbett, Dr. Rehack, like all of these medical professionals were in my life. So when this happened at 17, um, Bob and Joanne Corbett were one of the first people to reach out to me. They're doctors of chiropractic, and Joe is a doctor of a million things. Like, she's one of those people that has a business card that is double sized because of all the initials after her name. And they really took me under my wing, or under their wing, and guided me through that next year really, really well. And so I was blessed that I was able to combat a lot of the symptoms within about 6 months. I had 80% of my function back, and within a year to 16 months, I was probably back to what I would say 99%. I still have telltale signs when I get really tired or worn out, or if I need a chiropractic adjustment in a really, really bad way, particularly up in the cranial areas like C1, C2, C3. I definitely at that point can start to see a little bit of a difference in my facial patterns. But
yeah.
it's a nice warning system now that I'm being run down. So
Well, warning systems come along in our lives, and sometimes they're in physical form, sometimes they come in other ways. But all of them, hopefully, we're alert enough to them that we are prepared to take the action, the corrective action needed. And I'm also thinking about these different struggles and moments in your life that could have taken you in different directions, like a negative direction. We see it happen all too often. I know that you also then went through a really difficult business failing
yeah.
uh, that happened. Then your family lost its dream home during the economic downturn in 2015. So when all of these things are happening, and of course that's as recent as 6 years ago, so you would have been in your mid 30s at the time. There are a couple of options. One is to just feel like the victim, where the world is completely against me. Nothing's ever going to go right. God, have you forgotten that I'm even here? I have a family. We've been through enough. Wasn't the loss of my dad enough? Kind of.
Mhm.
So I'm interested in hearing you take us through how you chose to go in the healthier direction, or if you struggled with that.
Well, no, I definitely struggled. I remember, particularly after waking up New Year's Eve there, and or New Year's Day, and not having function. Because at the time I was in my senior year of high school. I was doing a musical that I ended up having to step out of, and the, I it's over Christmas break that happened. And so for another 10 days I didn't see friends. And I lived in the basement, um in a room. It was a concrete addition, so it was quiet, so I could sleep in a little bit longer. And I mean, I hunkered down in there, and it was both literally and figuratively dark, because I had the windows closed and they weren't very many. My walls were painted black because that was cool when I was 17.
Nice and
And
depressing
you
for
know,
that setting.
I was yeah, I was in a dark, dark way. Um and I didn't have a lot of contact with my friends because they didn't really know what had happened, and I didn't really feel like phoning and talking to people about that. And it wasn't until my first day back at school where I really realized that I needed I needed the socialization, because otherwise I was stuck with my own head. But it's one of those things that, like I said, I had a great team around me. I always have. I've had people who rally around me and who support me. And you know even in my darkest days, they still weren't bad. You know, I had a mom who loved me. I had friends and family who supported me. And it was finding those blessings and the grace. One of the greatest gifts that came from that particular incident was I got a real eye-opening lesson in what happens when you become complacent, because I had stopped really caring about performance at that point. I'd been acting for 11 years, and I would just dial in for, like, you know, like literally phone in the performance. Like I would just kind of show up and hi, you know, because I was the guy with all the experience. Especially at 17, when you've been doing it since you were 6, like everybody, half the people don't even get into the arts until they're in their early 20s. And
Mhm.
I'd already been at 17 doing it for over a decade. And but when it was taken away, oh, I got the hunger back. And you know, Les Brown talks about how you need to be hungry. And I had stopped being hungry. And when I was starved for the meal that I craved, that put a real fire under me. It gave me a reason to want to do the rehab. And the rehab was not fun. The rehab sucked because, you know, they're prodding at you. And like, I remember that they had this little pinwheel, and they would run it across my forehead, and it had these little like spikes on it. And so they'd run it right to left. And as they'd go over, because it was hemispherical, so they would run on the right side, and then literally as soon as they reached the bridge of my nose and would hit the left, I couldn't feel it anymore. But this hurt. It was like ow, 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 ow. No, I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. I can't feel it. But then I'd leave, and I'd have these little pinpricks over my forehead
Right.
and down my cheeks
Yeah.
and on my ears, just trying to test where the function
Well,
was.
and that's the appearance every young guy wants, especially if
Right.
they're on a stage. Who doesn't want to have a head that looks like a cheese grater?
Well, and then on top of it, so this is where my friends were both wonderfully supportive and absolute dicks at the same time, because they would make me laugh. And I'm somebody who genuinely is jocular. I love to laugh. I love a good time. Uh, I just love comedy, right? And I'm generally in good spirits. And so it was easy to make me laugh. But when they'd make me laugh, I would only laugh out of the right side of my face because the left side didn't work. So I'd go, and it would, like, I would drool, and oh, it was just awful. It
Yeah.
was just awful. So yeah, from an appearance point at 17, I mean, I'd like to think I'm a good looking dude then and now. It was a definite blow to the ego, and took a lot to humble myself. But again, I needed it. I needed it to know that this was what I wanted to do. Because if I didn't want to do this and it got taken away, it wouldn't have mattered, right? Maybe some of the other things might have mattered more, but this was the thing that drew my focus. I needed to get back into film and television. I needed to be back on stage, and I was going to do everything in my power to do it. And this when I first got introduced into personal development and mindset too, because one of the first things Bob and Joanne did was they didn't try to treat my physical symptoms. They tried to treat the mental. You know, let's get in the game. Let's get focused. Let's figure out what it is. So, I mean, it was through Bob and Joanne that I first learned about Dr. John DeMartini, and through there, I started to learn about Les Brown and Tony Robbins, and that's a gift to itself to be exposed to that kind of mindset and thought and experiences early on, like in my late teens and early 20s, to already be aware of mindset and some of the different ways of looking at the world. What a blessing.
Our guest here on The Big Impact is Sean Tyler Foley. You can find him online at Sean, S-E-A-N, TylerFoley.com. And Sean, as we're talking about the journey that led you to choose to remain in the spotlight, even when it probably would have been more comfortable to shirk back and stay in the darkened rooms and all those things, that it would be the polar opposite of what I can clearly tell your personality is built on. I'm also reminded of the reality that you and I speak for a living in one form or another. I'm often behind a microphone or in front of a camera. You're speaking to live audiences, you're performing, you're in front of cameras. So the concept of a fear of public speaking is really quite foreign, I think, to both of us. But we know that surveys have demonstrated very clearly that for the average adult, whether in America or Canada, really wherever, I think if I remember right, the number one fear was like fear of heights. And then the number two is the fear of public speaking.
And
The,
it's over death.
yes, it's over death. And so the flop sweat, the shaking hands, the stuttering, I once interviewed a lady for a TV show that I host who was so nervous that, and it was just a two shot. I was talking with her and she was so jittery, she jittered her way out of the shot so often that I literally conducted the rest of the interview standing on one of her toes just to keep her in the shot. So you've seen this. I know you speak to a lot of groups about the confidence. In fact, the book that Sean has, friends, is called The Power to Speak Naked. Now, I'm not ready to sign up for that level because I think my audience would quickly flee the room, but I'd love to have you take us inside that book.
Well, so the Power to Speak Naked came about for exactly what you were talking about. So many people would come to me and say, "How do you do what you do?" And what they were actually asking is, "How is it that you're taking the stage? You look so confident. You don't look like you're afraid." And it's because genuinely I love the stage. And so I had to, first of all, reverse engineer why it was that I didn't experience stage fright as often as people had. And I have experienced stage fright. I've very clearly experienced it twice in my life, and I had to figure out why was that, what what triggered it, and how do you get over it? Because it didn't impact me. So first of all, why do I love the stage? Well, because I started at 6 years old, and anybody who has a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old child knows that they have no fear. Like, fear is a thing that we learn. We learn fear. We are conditioned for fear. And if you have somebody all your life who tells you public speaking is terrifying, public speaking is terrifying, public speaking is terrifying, you're going to believe that narrative. For me, I was told being on stage is the greatest experience of your life. Being on stage is the greatest experience of your life. And that message is ingrained in me to the point where I seek out those opportunities because I love them, because I love the feeling of being on stage, particularly when I can be impactful. Nothing creates better satisfaction than when you can have an impact on an audience and you can see that you're clearly making a difference in how they're feeling and how they're processing something. And so the book came about as a reverse engineering of the process. Why do I feel comfortable on stage? What are the things that I do regularly so that I could then answer the question that was so often asked, how do you do that? And what I discovered is that people are misdiagnosing themselves in a very unfortunate way, because everyone will claim, as you had pointed out, 77% of North Americans will claim to have a fear of public speaking. And yet none of those people actually do. It is a very small fractional piece of the world that actually legitimately has a fear of public speaking. And I can hear the audience right now. I know what they're saying, Bill. They're like, "No, but Tyler, wait. I really do. I have a fear of public speaking." And to those people, I will say, when was the last time you were in a restaurant? And I'm willing to admit that it has been a weird 18 months, and the last time you were at a restaurant may not have been for 2 years. But have you ever been to a restaurant? And while you were there, did you order food? Because if you were able to order food in a restaurant, you spoke in public. Not only did you speak in public, you very likely spoke to a stranger because you probably didn't know your wait staff, and you asked for a thing that you wanted and you got it. So all of these false narratives that are around public speaking, I'm afraid to speak in public, I'm afraid to speak to strangers, I'm afraid to ask for what I want, all of those are completely null and void if you have at any point in your life gone to a restaurant and ordered food. So let's stop that narrative right now. The reality is, when people say that they're afraid of public speaking, what they're actually afraid of is public judgment. And it's a lot easier for me to deal with somebody who has a fear of public judgment than it is for me to help somebody who actually legitimately has a fear of public speaking.
That's an interesting perspective on that. And you're right. The I've had so many conversations with people in the minutes before we were going to do an interview. And I'm not talking about over Zoom like you and I are, because people have become more comfortable on Zoom than they are in a live setting, or if there were a camera crew 4 feet away. So we're getting there. The world of the selfie with a camera on every phone and everything, for both better and somewhat for worse, has loosened up some of the fear of a visual representation of oneself being judged by others, right? But I can't tell you how many times I have had a conversation with somebody and I'm like, well, the crew is setting up, for instance, and we're getting along famously. And then when they hear the words, okay, we're all set, let's do it, all of a sudden the cheeks turn red, the neck turns red, the sweat begins, and the stammering often accompanies that. And so I'm wondering if you would also include in that, along with fear of being judged, maybe just a fear of technology, a fear of the presentation aspect of it, so that instead of just talking normally like you and I are, maybe there's this perception that I've suddenly got to become somebody else.
And that is definitely part of it, but that honestly, when you look at what the root cause is, and as somebody who's been in health and safety for a long time, starting with stunt works and then my own practice, we talk often about root cause analysis. And so when you look at why somebody would be afraid of technology or afraid of the authority or any of that, it boils down to this lack of self-confidence, which usually is because you're afraid of the judgment. You don't have confidence in your message enough to overcome the fear that somebody is going to judge the message that you are presenting.
Mm,
And that's horrible, because if somebody has been asked to be on your show, Bill, you're not asking them because you think they're okay. You bring people on, whether it's on television, radio, podcast, whatever, you're bringing people on because they are experts in their field, they have something to contribute, or you wouldn't have asked them.
right.
And the problem is we are so quick to give our power away by telling false narratives in our head that, oh, well, Bill interviews so many other important people. Who am I compared to them? Or I don't know the audience. Or what if the crew laughs at me? Or what if I look at the wrong camera? Or what if I look at the camera and I'm not supposed to look at the camera? Didn't they tell me not to look at the camera? What am I supposed to do? All of these stories
Yeah.
that we're telling in our head, instead of being grounded in the fact that our story matters, that we were asked there for a reason, that we are the authority, or they would have asked somebody else. And this doesn't have to be if you are on TV, stage, radio. This doesn't have to be if you're on a big platform like Tony Robbins or a professional speaker. This is the boardroom. Your boss asked you to give a presentation of last quarter's sales statistics, is because you are the one who is best equipped to give that information. They wouldn't ask you otherwise, because they're only going to ask the people who they want to have in front presenting that info. And this goes even into conversations with our loved ones and our spouse and our family. A lot of the times we're afraid to have these hard conversations, and then we actually say the thing that's on our mind. It becomes so much easier.
Yeah.
And
And
so I would encourage people to know that you are the authority, your story matters, and just tell it. Say the thing that you're afraid to say, and you'd be surprised at how freeing it becomes.
our guest here on The Big Impact is Sean Tyler Foley. His wife calls him Tyler, so we're going with Tyler, but the website is SeanTylerFoley.com. The book, the best-selling book, is called The Power to Speak Naked. And Sean, you snuck something in on me in our prior segment that I hadn't read before when doing my homework for our conversation today. You mentioned stunt work.
Yes.
I find that fascinating. I read a book about the great stuntman Hal Needham and all the things that went on behind the scenes and how dangerous it was. What on earth would possess you to go into stunt work? And give us a few stories of throwing your body into harm's way.
Well, so first of all, I would never throw my body into harm's way. It's one of the reasons why I love stunts the most, because you take something that looks really dangerous and engineer it so that it's actually remarkably safe. And I've always been fascinated by performance, and I love stage fighting. Like, I learned it very young. the art of, I did a lot of sword fighting and stage fighting when I was younger. And so it was one of those things where I had this opportunity when I was working in Vancouver to work with some incredible stunt professionals. Now, I am by no means a stunt man. I am an actor who is capable of doing my own stunts. And I was also very lucky because I was willing to do a lot of this stuff. I got to work with some incredible stunt coordinators, stunt people, and I got the opportunity to do some really fun things. My favorite, absolute favorite, was I was doing production and working with some stunt guys, and I got to do a 6-story high fall. And when you're that high, it's still low enough that you can't quite use an airbag, but it's just starting to push the limit of what they call as a box fall. So what they literally take 2 by 1 by 1 packing boxes, cardboard boxes, and they build them up. And if anybody ever used to watch like Fear Factor or stuff like that, you'd see them drive the cars into the big stacks of boxes. It's the exact same thing. So it sounds crazy, but those cardboard boxes actually collapse and compress in a very giving and nice nature. And
From
they
6 stories.
decelerate you in a very safe manner, but it is pushing the limit of what those boxes can do. And I remember doing that stunt and thinking that it was just the greatest moment of my life, because you really at that point get to experience free fall. I'd done box falls from lower heights, so like 2 stories, 3 stories. It's pretty commonplace to do boxes that way. This was the first time where I actually got to experience some weightlessness, where you let go and you're counting in your head, 3, 2, 1, turn and hit. Like it's you have some free fall with that. And it's funny because I had that experience when I got into safety. I remember yelling at the guys one day that they just wouldn't tie off. They were working on ladders, they were up on pitches, and like, it's actually not that safe the way that you wouldn't understand. You've never been on the tools, and they kind of were beaking at me. And I remember yelling at the top of my lungs, I used to jump out of 6-story windows for a living, and I'm here to tell you the tale. I promise you, if you fall off that 2-story peak, you're not going to enjoy that fall. You don't have. And I went off on this rant, and an executive actually heard me on this job site that we were at. It was a very, very, very large, big, coordinated, multi-billion-dollar production, or rather construction site, commercial construction site. And the exec heard me and kind of didn't say anything about it, and then brought it up at a toolbox meeting a couple of days later. And I went on this rant about, all the things that went into engineering, making that safe. It looks dangerous, but it's actually the safest thing I did. And I talked about the weeks of rehearsal that went into it, the months of prepping and planning that went into it, the 2 days of setup just to make that work for literally 3 seconds of celluloid that only became a half-second blip in the film. And all that went into it. And I said, and you guys are too worried about an extra 2 minutes putting on a harness and clipping it on. Anyway, I went on the rant again, and he said, we're having our annual safety stand down next month. I was wondering if you'd come and be a keynote. I went, absolutely. I had no idea at the time what a keynote was.
You're going to go
not
look
a clue.
it up.
Exactly. I agreed to it, and then used Google to be my friend, and was like, oh, okay, no, yeah, I could talk on this. That's what it is. It's just a talk. It's just the guy who talks.
It's a less volatile rant.
Yeah, it's exactly. I was like, I can take this down a notch, and I can really explore the themes of it. And that ended up being the first keynote presentation that I ever did, and that kicked me into this wonderful world of understanding that I could actually get paid to be on stage and say my own words instead of a playwright's words. And that became the most freeing, most incredible thing of my life. And now for the last 6 years, that's all I've done.
Now you've got at least a daughter. I don't know if you have more than a daughter. You have one daughter, 5 years old, happily married. And if your daughter let's say give her 3 years. So she gets to the age of 8.
Yeah.
And if your daughter comes to you and says, Dad, I want to be in the play, and then I want to do stunts, and I want to jump off of buildings into cardboard boxes, Dad would say, what?
Absolutely, sweetie. And the best part is so I don't have to ask. She's already in film and TV. She did her first commercial when she was 11 months old. You can't have a dad in the industry and not get into it yourself. And she auditions a lot. And if she wanted to get into stunts, obviously it would depend on the stunt work. There are some things where people put themselves in harm's way for the sake of a shot that probably they shouldn't do. And there's like anything, there's always risk in what is done, and it's calculated risk. But the box falls, they're actually some of the safest stunts that you can do because you typically only do it once, maybe twice. So much planning goes into it, and it really is. There's the over engineering for margin of error in something like that is extreme. And I frankly, I would rather do a box fall than an airbag fall. Airbags hurt,
Hmm.
and they have a very narrow sweet spot where I can miss the center of the boxes and clip an edge of a zone and still be okay. Where with an airbag, you don't quite have that margin of safety.
For some reason, I'm picturing the sharp edges on boxes as being an issue on that abrupt
Crunch them
fall.
down.
Yeah, you crunch them right down. Sean, we've got a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that we leave our audience with some really clear-cut takeaways for overcoming fear of all sorts, whether it's the six-story box fall or back to what we were discussing earlier, the fear of public speaking. Your book's been pretty well received, The Power to Speak Naked. And I'm sure that title ties into the advice that everybody was given, probably back in seventh grade when you had to give an oral presentation on something in science or in English, and you had your 3x5 cards and you just didn't want to do it. And somebody said to you, maybe mom or your grandpa said, all you got to do is picture the audience naked. And
Yep.
that never really worked for me in any way, shape, or form.
Because it's the worst advice ever.
Yeah, it's awful. It would be very, very distracting. And I've been before a number of audiences where that's the last thing that I would ever want to have happen. Um,
Yeah.
so take us into some practical takeaways for overcoming that fear.
Well, so the first one, and really, I love that we got a chance to talk about jumping out of buildings. You have to take the leap. You have to leap and know that the safety net is there to catch you. And the safety net in public speaking is the fact that the audience is on your side.
Hmm.
So I've already challenged your audience to think about and reevaluate what they're saying when they say that they have a fear of public speaking. So we've already crushed that myth because they don't. Nobody listening to this, or if there is, it's one in a million, one in a couple hundred million that may actually legitimately have a fear of public speaking. But for the majority of people, you don't have a fear of public speaking. It really is a fear of public judgment. So let's attack that fear and know that the first thing is that fear is coming from a false narrative where you think that the audience is somehow judging you. Well, I would challenge your audience to think of the last time they went to any presentation, even if it was listening to this show right now. Who tuned in thinking to themselves, man, I hope this sucks. I hope Bill brings on the worst guest that he's ever had and I get no value out of it. Nobody thought that. They came in expecting the best. We do that for any show that we go to and any presentation, even if it's as simple as just going to the theater to be entertained. We don't want it to be bad. We want it to be good. We go away disappointed when it doesn't meet our expectations, but at the very beginning, we are in eager anticipation of something being good. So the audience is on your side. You just then have to deliver. And if you trust yourself that you are the authority, it becomes a lot more easier. So quit giving your power away. The other thing that you can start to do, and it's so true, like even with the box falls, you need to visualize what the target is. Like I needed to know where I was going. You talk about precision stunt drivers. They focus on where they want to go, not where they don't want to go. And so many times when we're public speaking, we focus on where we don't want to go. Oh, I hope I don't screw up. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to screw up. I hope I don't forget my words. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to forget your words. Quit focusing on the negative outcome and start focusing on the positive outcome. I hope this is the best presentation that I've ever given. I hope I give Bill's audience and Big Impact Radio the best show that they've had in a year, 2 years, 10 years. I want to be the memorable thing that everybody takes away. I want to be the episode that people revisit. I want to be your flagship banner one when you talk about great hosts that are great guests that have been on your show. I want my name to be top of your tongue. And so if I focus on that as the outcome, even if I don't actually meet that, it's that old famous saying, right? Shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you'll land among the stars. Well, so look at the outcome. You need to know what your target is. I think of even the precision skiers when they're going through high dense alpine forest and skiing between trees. It's because they're looking between the trees. They're focusing on the path that they want to go and they never hit the tree. But if they focus on the tree, that's when impact happens. So knowing that you have the power to control the room because they're already on your side, you are the authority. You only need to go in and present information that you already know or you wouldn't have been asked to do it. Now you just need to focus on the outcome being good and what you want that final delivery to be, and get away from trying to memorize a script. That is the worst thing that you could possibly do.
That is no good. Absolutely.
Yeah, do not do that to yourself. It takes too much mental prep.
Yep.
It takes away too much valuable space within your mind that is unnecessary. Have bullet points. Know what the end destination is, but treat it like an adventure. If I wanted to come down and visit you, Bill, I would plug in your address into my GPS, but I need to be able to detour in case I need to go to the bathroom, or if I get hungry and I need to go to a restaurant, or if the I-95 is closed and so I need to detour on a back road. If you get locked into a script, all you know is the one highway, and that's all I can take. But if you learn to be comfortable with waypoints and know that you can detour and come back to some of these waypoints, as long as you're getting to the end destination, your audience doesn't know what you're going to say. So you can say anything, and as long as you get them to the end destination that you agreed on, you have fulfilled your purpose.
Yeah, very good thoughts. It's always fascinating to watch someone who's presenting and using a teleprompter when the prompter goes awry. There's, as a public speaker, there are a few things more humorous to me because now, granted, I'm not a president of the United States giving the State of the Union address, so I get it. You got to be precise with your language. But man, if you don't have any heart knowledge of what you're presenting, and if it's just truly the words that somebody else wrote, you're not invested in it. You're not going to deliver it well. And if something goes wrong, you're lost. You're up a creek without a paddle.
Well, and the other thing is too, I think a lot of people think that they talk the way that they write, and the reality is they don't.
No, not even close.
Like, I write distinctly different than I speak, and I know that because my book was spoken, not written.
Yeah.
When we put the book together, it was a compilation of all of the training seminars that I had done, and we just grabbed the audio from the video and then transcribed the audio. And when I look through the book, I'm like, I would never type that.
Right.
But it's exactly what I would say.
Yeah.
And so I've let my ego go aside, and I'm like, no, because that is actually in my voice.
Yeah.
And if people hear me speak and then they read the book, they go, oh yeah, that Tyler fellow, he's got something to say. So I stand by it. But that's the other problem. We write all of this fancy language and then try to articulate it out when that is not actually who we are. So again, authenticity is synonymous with self-awareness. You want to give a good presentation, you need to know who you are on the inside. And that's where the title comes from, The Power to Speak Naked. It's speaking your raw, naked truth, stripping it down so that you don't need the PowerPoint, you don't need the teleprompter, you don't need anything. And yes, I would like some people to be able to have the courage to know that their message is so important, that their presentation is so on point that it doesn't matter what they wear. They could be on stage naked and nobody would notice because they would be captivated by the words and not what was being presented visually.
For those of you who are listening to us in podcast form or watching the video version on our YouTube channel, we'll put the link to the book, The Power to Speak Naked, in there. If you're listening to us on the radio, head to the website at Big Impact Radio or go to SeanTylerFoley.com and you can be connected to all the resources there. And if you're associated with a business or a cause, I'm sure that as soon as Canada lets him cross the border, he'd be happy to come and speak to your audience. You guys are trapped in so many different ways right now. Sean, I'm glad we could connect. Thanks for the insight, for the time, and for sharing your story.
So thank you for having me. I appreciate it more than ever, and I'm glad that I had this opportunity to serve your audience.